All right, ladies and gents, welcome back to Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I have a special guest. I say everyone's a special guest, but for a different reason. This project has been it's been very special to me in the ways that not only am I able to connect with people that I've never met before, either industry leaders in police or fitness or mental health, I'm also able to have a really good reason, a really good excuse to connect with people that have been very influential in my career who I've known personally. And today with me, one of my leaders coming up in the career, John Pagel. John, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm really excited to do it.
Yeah, man. So for the audience, many people are going to listen in. They're going to know you. They're going to know your name, especially those from our home agency, Kent. But for many people, they don't know you. And a lot of it is probably because of your humility. You don't have a social media, like a big police social media account like I'm trying to build. But I do want to just get in and start off to let people know the huge array, the uncommonly vast array of assignments that you've held and where your career went with promotions. And just give us a little taste to start.
So a lot of times when people ask me about my career, I jokingly respond that I did every job on the Kent Police Department except chief of police.
Exactly.
And I did. I was in patrol, traffic, canine, detectives, narcotics, SWAT. I wrote policies and procedures for 2 years, promoted to sergeant, supervised the training unit. I was a team leader on the Valley SWAT team, promoted to lieutenant. I did internal affairs. I supervised the auto theft task force and was the commander of the detective unit, and then promoted to captain. And I remember vividly, I was sitting with our equipment rental people, and they were asking me what order they wanted to build cars in. That was my job. I supervised the fleet. And I thought to myself, I said, this is not what I signed up to be as a cop. And I went into the chief's office and I asked him if I could voluntarily demote back to being a sergeant, kind of being a people person. And his jaw dropped for a second. And he said, I get it. I'll let you do it. And so that's how I finished my career as sergeant.
Yeah, man. So I just want to take a minute to marinate. I know almost all those assignments. I probably would have been able to recite about 60% of them. But yeah, for people listening in, and I think that especially the younger officers, a lot of these careers are going to go really quick. We have a young profession. We have a young department. And so it's not uncommon for people to maybe get into a specialty younger and then maybe promote out of their first or second specialty. I think the Swiss Army knife of a career that you've had is probably going to be, it already was rare. It's probably going to be increasingly rare to really be true jack of all trades and span all those things. Because I think when we think about police archetypes, like a tactician is one end of the spectrum, right? Like SWAT, team leader, and then to be canine, that's a different angle. I know a couple people that have done both, extremely rare though. And then detective's a totally different direction as well. And man, before I forget, I'll just throw out that in retirement, you got into community education as a civilian working in the police department. So there's that direct, as direct as it gets, community engagement, right? So even more community driven with the public and education than the cops that do it.
Yeah, and I will say that being in the community education unit was very rewarding for me. There's a lot of good people in the Kent community, in every community, and helping enhance their safety and just talking to them about issues involving law enforcement was really rewarding.
Yeah. What out of all those hats you wore are the highlights that stick out to you?
I would say that canine was one of my favorite assignments. I was a generalist canine handler, so same as you, we both tracked suspects. That was very exciting. It was tense. It was rewarding at the end. It was frustrating too. My dog got injured. Your dog got injured. You know what that's like, and the toll it takes on you. So as rewarding as it wasn't my favorite assignment. My favorite assignment was when I was a sergeant. I supervised both narcotics and street crimes. That was fun
Yeah.
and
Do you?
impactful.
Yeah. So working, I guess touching on that, being that role as a sergeant, small team, dedicated purpose and direction. What about that role do you think is what had you soul searching and go for the voluntary double demotion back to sergeant to end your law enforcement sworn career?
I think that one I really enjoyed working with people more than supervising functions.
Mm-hmm.
And as a lieutenant and a captain, you're supervising functions. You're not really working with people. And conversely, you're also not working with the public. I think one of the things that I I was blessed with inherently is that I believe in the inherent goodness of people, and I think that that helped me in my career because, uh, especially like if you're working in narcotics, uh, you're working with people who are struggling with addiction most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
and you kind of get involved into the human side of it a little bit too. I remember we did a search warrant on a heroin dealer's house, and he was a disabled veteran from Vietnam.
Mm.
And when we did the search warrant on his house, he was awarded a Silver Star and a Purple Heart in the military. And so you can't define people in whatever problem part of their life they're in right now. There's a lot of different stories out there. We had a
Yeah.
confidential informant that was a heartbreaking story, but he was a good man. He was addicted to drugs.
Yeah, I love that, and I want to focus in on that because one of the overarching things, I mean, I have a loose agenda, very loose, but one of the things I definitely want to touch on and tell the listeners why you stuck out to me as someone that I didn't work for directly. You were a couple ranks ahead for just about my whole career, at least a few, and then got a little closer when you were back to sergeant. But I wasn't on your crew directly. But through my whole career, when you were in the building, when you were in the department, you had an impression. And part of that was you were one of the cops that I can remember, one of the leaders that was upbeat, you had a smile on your face, and despite a full career and all the tenure, and despite all the assignments where some people hear these things and they might think, okay, that's a lot of bad dudes that this guy is interacting with, but to still have a smile on your face, still talk about, potential objectives to be a teacher and then getting into community education unit, which is very much teaching and coaching and helping the community be safe. And then still have a smile on your face in retirement. And I think that for me, speaking about career direction, purpose, and wellness so much that you are exactly the type of role model we need to pay attention to more in the culture is people that have clearly navigated the career well. And before I keep just rambling, I think that one of the big key takeaways, and I'll ask you about it, is when you talk about the inherent good in people and you're able to talk about these dealers, these quote unquote bad guys that a lot of people would label, and really quickly remember the humanizing aspects of them because they are people.
Yeah, and again, I guess I would clarify that because there are some bad people out there, but they're few and far between. And I think when that was probably in the middle of my career, we started having this saying when we were interviewing candidates for law enforcement, is that you have to have the mind of a warrior and the heart of a servant, um, and that is really true. I mean, you have to, and oftentimes be just as satisfied giving a person a ride home as you are using force on somebody. When there's nothing like breaching a door on SWAT. I mean, when you're at the door and the ram's hitting the door and it's coming down and the adrenaline's pumping, that is a lot of fun. But when you get someone who's maybe made some bad decisions is out on the street at 3 o'clock in the morning and you get them home safely, that's important too.
Yeah, I love that. What do you think helps you navigate things in this positive way, the career and just your life in general?
Yeah, you know what? I don't know. I don't know. I think that that probably faith has a little bit to do with it,
Mm-hmm.
um, and just bumping into people that have made an impact on me out of the blue. You know, I remember there were criminals have said things to me that have really resonated. And when you approach every situation, that you could learn something from whoever you're with, um, then that's important. You have to be open to that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember I took a black guy to a doctor's appointment. That was their job. If they were in jail and you take them, if they need medical treatment, you take them to the hospital. And and we're sitting there, and this guy comes up who knows the person that I have at the hospital, and he starts just giving me a hard time. And
Mm-hmm.
as he walked away, I looked to the prisoner. I said, "Hey, he sure didn't like me very much." He goes, "Can I tell you something?" He goes, "I've been mistreated by a lot of cops in my career, or during in my lifetime." He goes, "I don't judge you by the way I was treated by others." He goes, "I hope you don't judge all people by the way that that guy treated you."
Mm.
And I'll never forget that.
Yeah. It's such a way to flip the script, right? Ultimately, you mentioned being a people person, and I think that's a huge part, right? We need to remember that this is the people business. There's a lot of involved with it, right? There's a lot of conflict. It's communication, it's problem solving, but really, it's people at their worst and people at their best, and how we can navigate that the best way to again take care of people, because it always comes back to safety and protecting others' safety and trying to be as safe as we can while we do that. So it's at the base of it, it's always people. And when people, I said people a lot, but there are people that look at this profession and they think about it because they want to do hands-on work, and maybe they've never really connected with customer service roles, and they start to share some of that. I'm like, man, if you're averse to customer service and patience and communication and taking care of someone's needs, then you're looking the wrong way. If this is what you think the job will be, right? If you think it's going to be the movies and just taking care of business, it's very much inclusive of all those things.
And along with that, I would encourage anyone getting into law enforcement is take your breaks from patrol,
Mm,
because all those things you just said, they will wear you out. And if you can get a break, I spent 3 years writing policies and procedures. Well, that was 3 years that you weren't having to help people all the time, and you, as you probably are the same as me, there has been that very first call out of the chute when you start your shift, and that person uses up all your patience
mm-hmm.
for the whole day, and then you're
Yeah.
like, man, I feel sorry for anyone who's going to get me after this, because it can be really hard.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, right? There's so many ways you can burn out, and just to be able to change a little bit your environment. And for those listening, some people might be thinking, "Man, I don't have a big department with a ton of specialties." Well, there's other ways around that, right? And I'm a huge proponent for people to explore changing their shift. We all know what working graveyard in a busy city, a more violent crime area can be like. Every 6 months or year after year, and then you do start, it makes it easier to lose hope and easier to lose that positivity, because you're not interacting with a lot of people in a positive way. Not a lot of the general public. Most people are asleep, and those that would wave at you positively with a smile, they're not anywhere around your shift. So that is something that I offer most people to consider, is like, hey, maybe do a run on day shift for a little bit. Get back to being a normal person, in some ways, time on, time off. Or for the people that are most opposed to showing up to a community event as part of their shift or even off duty, um, maybe really push yourself to do that, because it can be so invigorating and just kind of refreshing just to be in a totally different setting where you're not quote unquote enforcing full time.
Yeah, I remember, we have Cornucopia Days, which
Mm-hmm.
is a community event, a big fair. And working at that booth, it wasn't very much fun. But one thing is that you can separate the negative noise out of what you hear every day, and you get real citizens coming up to you and expressing their appreciation for the job that you're doing. And then you get a little bit of a more balanced look at how the public really feels about law enforcement. And, you know, our old chief Ed Crawford used to say this all the time: the community wants to love their police department, and I think that's true.
Yeah. And sometimes I think you do have to be open to those opportunities, right? If you're working a shift or working in a neighborhood where depending on what's happened lately, nationally or otherwise, maybe you're waving at kids and offering a sticker, and then they're either giving you a weird look, or their parents are kind of shooing them away and giving you a bad look, right? And that hurts. It doesn't feel good, because you just want to build that connection, and then to be in a different setting, maybe like the community fair booth, right? Maybe at a recruiting fair where little kids are walking by, or just a public event. Maybe it's security somewhere, and kids are excited, right? They remember, they know what they're learning, what police are in school. Maybe they're seeing it on their show, talking about, if you're in trouble or you need help, you can talk to a police officer or a firefighter. Like, this is very front of mind with a 4-year-old at home. So I do see that kind of excitement and kind of that I guess that curiosity sometimes with kids, and it's good to be around that. I think sometimes we do get burned out if we don't have any exposure to that.
Right, right. And get out of your car too.
Mm,
See kids shooting hoops or throwing a football around. A life changing thing for me was teaching police science at Kent Meridian High School.
yeah,
Totally changed my view of that school and young people.
yeah. Tell us more about that, because that's another hat you've worn. Not a full time job, but part of the duties that you volunteered to partake in.
Yeah, so at that time, the former deputy chief, Mike Painter, was working with the assistant superintendent of the Kent School District. And it was 2008. And they wanted to put together a program to put cops in schools and teach a class. So 3 of us got together, Ken Thomas, who just retired as the chief of Des Moines,
Mm-hmm.
and Stacy Judd, who's still in the community education unit. And we put this class together. And the dual purpose of creating a connection between law enforcement and youth, and then also as a recruiting tool to create a little more diversity on the police department. Um, and as far as creating a connection with kids, it was a smashing success. But on the metric of getting candidates into law enforcement, it was an abject failure.
Mm-hmm.
We
I
just
think
did. We
though,
never
yeah,
got an applicant.
I think
And they probably still have that program.
they do.
So 15 years. I don't know. Has there been an applicant yet?
Well, I think it's hard to suss out. I don't know if it's tracked, but I do know that we have explorers that have come up either through our department or other departments. We have current Kent police officers, sergeant that work Kent explorers, but then we have hires cops from other explorer programs, and then I'm sure there's Kent explorers that are getting hired in other agencies. And I know that there's some crossover. Some explorers take police science, right? It's tough because I think some of those seeds are you got to wait for the tree to really grow before it's going to bear any fruit. And so I think it's huge though. Those that look at my social media, a lot of times lately I've been sharing articles that come out about cops in schools and school resource officers, and there's been a real standoffishness with a lot of school districts. And I just love what you've reminded me of, and then sharing with the listeners is saying, hey, cops in schools can look a lot of different ways. One of the programs literally called Cops in Schools when I was on patrol as a canine, that I was very reluctant to take part in because I wanted to do canine stuff and be available for calls, was literally just to drop into lunch, elementary schools, coordinate with teachers if they want you to do a safety talk or read a book or help with math, do whatever, kind of choose your adventure that way. But it doesn't have to. I think a lot of people, especially outside of the profession, hear cops in schools and they think enforcer, and that's not what I'm talking about. I think that's not what most people think as cops. They just want to be there to build bridges, especially outside of an enforcement mode, so it doesn't become that's our only role. Our only role isn't just to get kids in trouble or people in trouble. It's to help.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. And just to kind of tie into that, my old canine partner used to say, um, every person you contact is a potential juror. And so every time you interact with somebody, and then they're interacting with their friends, or like I said, maybe on a jury, and someone says, well, I think police officers are X or Y or Z, and then they say, no, that's not true. I know Sergeant Tone, and
Mm.
that is not the way he is, and that's really important.
Yeah, and when you say canine partner, you mean another canine officer, not
Yes,
your
not
your
my
dog.
dog.
Yeah, your dog told you a lot of things, but
Yeah,
wise things as well.
pretty much how I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, isn't that the fact? Like, always trust your dog.
Right. Yeah, and you can
Yeah.
tell when they're looking at you that they're just wondering why are you telling me to do something? This doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I was just talking to a newer handler, and I think it usually goes that way where you check in, the newest dog handlers, and kind of going back to yesteryear and your golden years. But, we were talking about, lessons learned on the calls, and me and this handler were just reminiscing on this recent call he had. And I had almost verbatim the exact same thing where bank robbery in the day, officers literally pointing one way, saying the suspect went this way. You're trying to get the dog to work down that way. Dog has no interest, and the dog's pulling the other way, and you're getting embarrassed, and then going. Hopefully you actually do work it out and go the other way, follow the dog, trust the dog, but then the surveillance reveals that the officer was wrong or the witness was wrong. But yeah, I also feel like it's cool to share those stories, especially for those that don't have an opportunity or don't have the awareness with canine tracking dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, trust your dog. That's like lesson number one, right?
Yeah, yeah. The power of belief. So before we started the recording, we were talking a little bit about you coming into law enforcement. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about that? Always wanting to be a cop.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I don't know why. I was drawn to the profession, but I knew early on. And so I started testing when I was 20. And I tested from uh, Port Orchard, Washington to Los Angeles, City of Los Angeles Police Department.
Oh wow.
So I probably took at least 15 tests. And, um, and I found that when I'm, especially during the oral interview process, that departments have personalities.
Mm.
And there were interviews that did not go very well for me. And I knew right away, the way they were approaching me. I shouldn't say that. I didn't know it at the time. In looking back, uh, that wasn't going to be a good fit for me.
Mm.
And when I was done, when I took my oral board at Kent, um, I knew that was the place I wanted to be, and I think that the oral board, who I still am friends with today, knew that I was the right fit, um, and after that, the rest was history. And I made a decision. The one thing I would throw out there is that, uh, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of things in life came easy to me. But when I walked out of that, when Captain Byerly offered me the job, and I walked out, I said, I am going to give this job everything I have. And I did that for 29 years. And when I didn't have anything left to give, I retired, which is
That's the
important. You don't want
that's
to
the
stick around too
perfect
long.
time. Yeah.
Yeah.
What man, I want to jump around. The first thing I want to say is for the listeners, testing 15 places is not like today where you take one or two tests and you send your scores to 15 places. You're taking 15 separate tests. That's 15, half days or full days, right?
Full days. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
and the stories about being
Yeah. Yeah. And
an
so
auditorium.
they started streamlining it a little bit, and they'd run the written test and the physical agility test on the same day. So when you went to Auburn, you did the written and then you did the physical, um, and then they would give you. Or Seattle was the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and more we're hearing these stories, and the yesteryears of prior generations, and how many people would test for one or two spots. But yeah, what was that like for you?
It was frustrating. I remember Fife as an example. I applied for Fife PD,
Mm-hmm.
um, and there were a couple hundred applicants, and I finished number two, and they took number one.
They had
And
one spot. Yeah,
yep,
and you're
yep,
hoping they fail the background or something, right?
yeah. I mean, that's kind of what you were doing, and you'd end up, with that many people, you'd end up, 15 or 16 on a list, and then there weren't that many openings.
Yeah. What was there any role when you wanted to be a cop growing up and then getting actually the job, finding the right fit culturally with Kent? Was there any role that you'd always thought about, out of all the hats you wore, but the one or two things that you visualized in the career?
Well, the funny thing is that when I was first applying, I wanted to be a chief of police,
Ah.
and which in retrospect turned out to be the last thing I wanted to do.
It's not
And I don't
funny.
want to discourage anyone from promoting up, but it's got to be the right fit for you too.
Hmm.
It's got what your personality is, and if you love the job, then when you're the captain, you're not really doing the job anymore.
Yeah. What advice would you give someone? Um, Maybe this is personal, right? There's commander roles popping around the corner, and something that I've been entertaining in my own life, being mid-career. You get some encouragement from above, you get some encouragement from below, but what helped you navigate some of your decisions to change assignments, especially to promote?
So I would go back to what I was saying about getting breaks from the enforcement side. A lot of the decisions I made, well, the accreditation position when I was writing policies and procedures, that was more of a career move. Something that would be helpful when you wanted to promote. So that had some of it, but also um, working in detectives uh, was was more of a break from patrol, and
Hmm.
because I love patrol, but it would wear you out,
Yeah.
and so that was kind of
Yeah.
so it's kind of both. Some of it was career um, led, and then some of it was just kind of being strategic
Hmm.
with assignments.
Yeah, I do feel like when you change roles, you're able to kind of hit that refresh button, right? Again, you can get burned out in all these different ways, and I've seen it numerous times. Detectives getting burned out, and then coming out of that grind. It's a different kind of grind, right? But it's definitely hard. It's a heavy lift. So to come back to patrol, I've seen so many officers feel, in especially line level, but also sergeants, to come back to patrol from investigations. And it seems like this huge burden's lifted. Um, it might sound weird to outsiders, but yeah, when you have a caseload and you have call outs and all these things, but then you go back to literally what you work out is what you're doing at the time. And it's easier to leave work at work. But yeah, it's such a different dynamic that can be applied in a lot of ways. I definitely feel it in recruiting, where yeah, it's a different stress, especially when you had all the vacancies that we had and all the vacancies most people have. Um, and then to get piled on, training because our recruiting went well. I mean, you did training sergeant, like that can be a lot. A lot of things can fall to you, but a crazy, awesome way to learn a lot of stuff too, to get different exposures.
Yeah, and there is legitimate criticism of moving around too much. Uh,
Hmm.
Brian Jones was a sergeant on the department, and he would kid me a lot, but there's some truth to it. He goes, "You're the jack of all trades and master of none,"
Yeah.
and there are positions, especially in detectives, or SWAT, uh, that require um, like expertise, and that expertise can only come through experience, and you don't want to have a person uh, assigned to a homicide that's a little tricky, and they don't have any interview skills because they haven't done it before, and then they have to try and get a confession from a suspect, and so yeah, it cuts both ways. It worked well for me, but
Yeah.
and I hear your point about detectives. I can tell you, um, I'd come into work on Monday morning, and there'd be a dozen felony referrals in my inbox, and I'm looking through our case management system, and it's like they already have 20 plus cases. Who am I going to drop these cases on? And so when they do go back to patrol, the goods that is at the end of their day, they're done.
Hmm.
They're not carrying that. Okay, well, how am I going to manage my day tomorrow or when I come back from vacation?
Yeah. No, for sure. And the jack of all trades thing, I think it's something to be mindful of. And I pulled up the full quote because this always intrigues me, and a lot of people haven't ever heard it. But it's actually a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. So um, I think that it just depends on the person, right? And it depends on the needs of your team. And some people, you can have this really well versed thing. I mean, to be an administrator and have worked all these things probably gave you a ton of insight to make a balanced decision, right? So you're not just making every decision as a captain, which is now an assistant chief of my department, just rebranded essentially. But you're making all these decisions to benefit patrol, but you're not seeing holistically the needs of every unit because you haven't worked with them, right?
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, I think that you do see a lot of times, people going to detectives and they come back to patrol and they are able to spread that information and that wealth of knowledge to their whole crew and even to their boss. Like I've had it, right? I haven't worked directly in investigations, but I've supervised people that have come back from detectives to patrol, and I was able to learn a ton from them.
Yeah, yeah. You learn, and during my career, the hardest thing to do um, was to get patrol officers to take statements from witnesses and victims and suspects and all of that stuff. They would, get a synopsis in their report, but when they go back to detectives, they find out the importance of having that statement, and so then they come back to patrol, and then, you know, suddenly it gets better.
Yeah, yeah. What I want to ask you about leadership, because it's a theme in my mind frequently, and it's something that affects everyone in leadership. And I want to have the listeners to think about leadership at their level, right? Pure leadership and informal leadership. But you've worn so many official hats. You've been a leader. You've been around a lot of strong leaders and probably some weak ones. Um, are there any themes or motivations that helped inform you on how you wanted to lead in the profession?
So the best definition of leadership I ever heard was it's one word, and that's leadership is influence. And then how do you the best leaders and sometimes the worst leaders influence people in a direction,
Mm-hmm.
and that's true of informal leaders. Informal leaders have influence within that group, sometimes more than the formal leaders. But I think the and I think the military is the same. The great thing about law enforcement is you can watch people. You're an officer. You work for five different sergeants, and you find out what they did that you really thought was good and what they did that was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so you take a little bit from every step of the way, and then when you're a sergeant, you look at your commanders and what are my commanders doing that I think works really well, because you hear people talk, and so then you pick and choose, and then you go to training, and you from a training class you might get two things from a week long class. Okay, these sound like really good principles, and then you build your own style because everybody's different.
Yeah, I love that. It makes me think of Bruce Lee. Kind of the absorb what's useful, discard what's not, and so you can get a lot emulating, your strong leaders and the role models for you. But yeah, that is so impactful, right? You can think about your worst bosses and how that could drive you to be the opposite way. And sometimes, unfortunately, it is so much more significant as a motivator or just a source of inspiration because you experienced what that's like and you saw the shortcomings there.
Yeah, and I just when I was a sergeant and lieutenant, there was a Captain Klein, and the one thing that I really liked about him was that he was never emotional. It was
Mm,
always just business. He was never super happy or mad and he was a great person to analyze a situation and come up with something that really made sense.
yeah. Would you label yourself as an emotional person, having said that and elevated that as a trait that you really appreciated?
I would, and probably the hardest thing that I ever had to overcome as a supervisor was to get beyond the emotion before you engage an employee,
Hmm.
especially for substandard performance. It
Yeah.
was real easy when you were mad. Hey, let's go car to car. Hey, you really messed up this call. What were you thinking? And because it's hard to have the tough conversation, but you have to force yourself to get beyond the moment and then have the discussion um, in a way that's most beneficial to the employee.
Yeah, it's almost like a version of writing the angry email and not sending it, right? Like you see what happened or you hear what happened or you read about what happened and yeah, you can soar up there and I felt myself I would identify myself as a pretty emotional person. Um But I felt myself get so infuriated when I read or watched one of my officers do something unsafe, right? And maybe it was a repeated thing, and almost want to call him in the office on, on primary air, not even like call him. I just want to get on the radio and just say, hey, like come find me. But then know that, hey, that's it. Those emotions are coming from somewhere, and it's care for this very important thing, and it's care for this very important person. However, I'm not going to be able to show up most effectively if I do it right now, and does it need to be addressed right now, or how can I do that to show up best for them and the real desired outcome, right? Which is to influence. It's to influence that behavior away. It's to influence them towards better practice and figure out how you can get there.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you do approach it that way, they'll respond better because they understand that it's coming from someone who cares about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I can see for sure, especially I think being personality wise, I think there's a lot of similarities between us two. But hearing about, retired, was it captain at the time, Klein? But yeah, to be labeled as so emotional, and I'm picturing the stoic, just very objective. Hey, this is the way we're going. But at the same time, for those that might identify a little bit more emotionally, I would accredit or attribute a lot of my success in doing the job and building relationships to my emotion and caring about the individual. So it's just a balance and figuring out how you're going to navigate through that.
For sure. But for me, anyways, that was my biggest obstacle. Is I was great. There's the I'm sure you've heard the story about when I caught those guys playing cribbage, and I lost my mind.
Yeah, I did hear that.
It just wasn't the right way to handle it.
Wow. It's good to be able to reflect and like think about how you do it different too. So retirement, we were talking and before all this and setting up this recording and what you've been doing real estate. You're playing tennis a couple times a week at least, right?
Yeah, usually. Well, I'm going to the police and fire Olympics in 10 days.
Oh yeah.
So I'm playing 5 days a week now.
That's awesome. What the first part I want to talk about is, in preparation for retirement, like what mindset did you have, or looking back helped you decide the time was right? And then what advice would you give to people at all stages of their career to make sure that they keep that, in their sights as they continue to process their career?
Yeah, I think that for me, it hit me at once. I had worked. I was in patrol. I was working as a sergeant. I was on swing shift. I decided to go back to graveyard because for a lot of reasons. And I cleared graveyard briefing, and I go up to Starbucks up on the Petrovitsky because that was the only one that was open. And I'm driving back down into the valley, and I pulled over and I called my wife and I said, you know what, I'm done. It was just that fast of a decision for me. But I would say what I've learned from people is that everybody is different. And I have known people who are happy being a police officer for 40 years. And that's great if that's what you want to do. Mm-hmm. For me, I thought that, at a certain point when you're fully eligible for retirement, then you're working for half pay. And there are more adventures out there. And and so that was my philosophy. And so I wanted to pursue other things. Luckily, I would highly encourage every officer contribute as much as you can to your, it's 401k or 457 plan, because I was able to buy. It cost me $134,000, but I bought a full retirement, which paid the penalty because I wasn't 53, and then my last year. So always be thinking about what your next career adventure that is going to be, because that, I remember when I got rear-ended in it was a weird story. Guy rear-ended me on purpose because I was on a traffic stop, and he claimed he was being kidnapped, and anyways hurt my neck. And I was off on disability for a while, and I was thinking to myself, what happens if I can't go back to work?
Right.
Well, that could happen to anybody at any time.
Right.
Um, you could be snow skiing
Mm-hmm.
and end up with a career-ending injury. So I think, staying aware of that and being able to transition if you need to. Think ahead.
Yeah. I think that's huge. I mean, so much of the job is contingencies and thinking worst case scenario, right? Like SWAT and all the tactics actually involved, or how a call comes out, and you're like, okay, what do I need to think about in case this goes a bad way? Um, but we don't like thinking about the uncomfortable conversations of what if something happens at work, or just as likely, more likely, maybe like statistically, like something could just happen in life, right? We just go about life, and you can get T-boned in your personal car. Not to say you get killed, but like, yeah, maybe the job, you can't do the job physically, and maybe you don't want to at any point for any reason. I've always said, like, you're one or two calls away from just not having it be a good fit anymore, and rather than be afraid of the unknown, think about and prepare what could we do. But I love that you focus it on more adventures and different adventures, because this job does become so much of our identity that it can be scary thinking about what else we can do. And we've heard a lot of horror stories about those that don't have any hobbies or close relationships outside of the job. So when they do retire, they're at a loss of purpose. um, has there been anything that was something that you had to work at in retirement as far as the identity shift?
No, and I, again, lucky, blessed, however you want to call it. It has been. I honestly, I don't really identify as being a police officer anymore in my life. It was, I mean, it's been 10 years. And
Yeah.
so I've kind of, that is a phase, um, that of my life that it's hard to remember sometimes anymore. I mean, I remember the stories and things like that, but, um, yeah, I don't, I have a totally different mindset, and it's probably good in some ways and bad in some ways,
No, I think it's
because my
great.
tactical
I think
mindset
it's
is
great.
probably not the way it should be anymore. Um,
What was that again?
my tactical mindset.
Oh.
Like when if I go to a restaurant or something, I don't really
Hmm.
scan the room anymore. I'll sit with my back to the door, that type of thing. And so
I think that's freeing.
it is in a way. Yeah.
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 So in a lot of ways, like, is it good? Is it success? Is it positive? I would say that if it helps you live free and clear and of peaceful mind, then yeah. It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast on the way into work, and it was talking about it was a psychologist talking about studies on safety and awareness and whether that yields actual safety. And I'd be curious to dive in, but basically the idea that some parents will teach their kids to be scared of what's out there so that they can be safer and happier, ultimately like a more fruitful life. Or you just kind of let kids be kids to some degree, maybe a little bit of mindfulness, but they weren't able to find a correlation of learning about vigilance and actually being safer, which I think that most people listening would be like, how could that even be? And again, it was just a little snippet, when I was listening to other things, and heading in. But I think it's worth thinking about, right? Like, I think that we all know either in ourselves at a point in our career or one of our close buddies that is beyond vigilant and arguably paranoid, right? And I think that it's worth thinking that and realizing that's not the goal. And at a certain point, if you can't go in public without 14 tourniquets and 3 guns and four knives and a blueprint of the building you're going into without feeling relatively calm, then that's not the goal, right? That's not. I don't think that's part of living a healthy, fruitful life.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There is too much of a good thing. And, but also you want to have awareness. And,
Hmm.
like my wife and I were on a walk a few months ago, and we're in a park, and there's a guy talking to the geese, and my wife is chattering away about something, and I'm looking for weapons, right,
Hmm.
in case this guy is going to come after us, right?
Yeah.
And so it's still a little bit of that situational awareness,
Yeah.
but not to where it is. And so I think you're right. Some of it's good. Too much of it is not healthy.
Yeah, but that's great. I think that's a great example for someone that's been, worked a full career. I mean, you retired what, 1 year earlier than your full technically,
Yeah.
right? So at 52, so that's almost your whole adult life as a cop, until you retired. Um, but then just to realize that you don't identify strongly as a police officer, you don't live in this fear, like this hyper vigilant state, but someone's talking, to these animals are talking to themselves. You have this shift where you're like, pay attention to the possible threat. Okay, weapons. Okay, how far away is he? Do we walk this way? Like that's kind of all you need, for at that time of point, right? You can assess whether you need to go back or leave or whatever. And then you kind of go back to life. And I think that's good, right? I think that too many of us, you see kids with their over the ear headphones and then their faces in their phone, and then they get robbed of these things, their headphones and their phone. Because yeah, that's not good. It's good to be aware. But yeah, it's a balance.
Yep. Yep. And you just reminded me of, one of the things that we did in CEU, community education, was we had foreign exchange students
Mm-hmm.
that were riding public transportation with their
Yeah.
heads down or their headphones on, and um, not lacking situational awareness, and then
Yeah.
being victimized.
I remember that huge spree. Yeah, I remember that on what downtown
Yep.
on the Benson. Yeah, huge spree of that.
Yep.
Well, man, I want to be respectful of your time, and we've covered a lot of ground. But do you have any closing notes? I mean, that would be helpful for those listening, and just reflections on your career, lessons learned.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I would encourage people to do is plan for their financial future. You know, your life is kind of like building a house, and you start with the foundation and build, and then at the end, if you do that wisely, then you do things. You can stay in law enforcement if that's what you like, or you can leave if you're ready to leave. But you're the one making the decisions. If you feel trapped, or this is the only thing you can do, you and I have both seen this, is people who stay too long,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're just really negative. They bring people down.
Yeah.
And when it's your time to go, you want to be ready to go.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, John. I'm not surprised, but I don't think we had a single curse word on here. After talking with you and my friend, Mr. Bill, I think we had a couple slip, but it was actually not very many. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No, it was great. I really appreciate the opportunity. I would just tell people that law enforcement is a very, very important career. You do impact people. I've had people throughout my career and even in retirement say that police officers change their lives, and it's honorable.
I love that. Thanks so much for coming on, John, and for the listeners, please continue to share this. It's going to be helpful for those in the career, navigating it, new officers, and until next time, take care, be well.